Hello, welcome to our experiment called Memory Lane, exploring the potential of vision language models in memory tasks. This project is brought to you by me, AJ, and Tawella here joining us today. And we also have Chi and Frank on our team who could not make it today. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, what's the method of loci? Some of you might have not heard this before, but you might have heard of memory palace technique. It's a mnemonic memorization technique, and it's used by ancient Greeks to today's memory champions. It's a way of memorizing a long sequence of things by us making associations with locations and the object you want to remember. So an example of how you would use the memory palace technique would be, let's say, you're very familiar with the layout of your house. So you could go ahead and place items you want to remember at different locations while you walk through your house. Now, this also works for like, let's say your commute to the library at school. Say you pass from your house and you want to remember a list of items from a shopping cart, for example. So maybe you want to buy garlic. You could think garlic connects with your house, and you want almonds, you could connect it with the bus stop. And you could do this on and on and on, and you could retrace your steps with the memory palace technique. So what are the pros and cons of the memory palace technique? So some of the pros is that it leverages the human sense of direction, and it's a lot more effective than other memorization techniques. And it's especially really good for long-term recall, as you'll see later on. However, it has its shortcomings with how difficult it is to use for new users. And it's because the mapping process is very creatively intense because you have to make an association for each item you're trying to remember. And there's actually a condition called aphantasia. It's a disorder where someone can't form mental images in their head. And we actually spoke to someone at the poster fair who has aphantasia.
And that takes us to our proposed solution, Memory Lane. Memory Lane is an app where users will input the image or the item in their memory palace that they want to associate an item with. And we will use GPT-4 to generate an image and a sample text based on the original image. So in this example, the user input a picture of a Tesla charging station, and we asked GPT to help us memorize spaghetti. And that generated an image of a chef with spaghetti near Tesla charging stations and a two-sentence long sample text output that creates a kind of wacky and bizarre way to memorize that item and your input image. And so to test out this app, we used three experimental groups. We have experimental group A that got the text and image hints, like in the example before, where the user will input an image and they'll get an image back and a little story. We have group B, where we just show the user the image that they submitted and the two sentences to help them create the correlation. And then we had a control group for the experiment. Now, when we were running human subjects, this is the timeline that we followed. So we would have subjects submit 30 photos of memorable locations along a familiar path. And this would be without their knowledge, knowing that this is for a method of loci study. We would then use memory lane to create these images and these text hints to help the subjects with their mapping process. And so once we have generated those images, the subjects would come into the lab where they would have 8 minutes to memorize a list of 30 items that, depending on which experimental group they were in, they saw different things. Once they had finished memorizing that, we wanted to test how well they can memorize the items. And so we wanted to prevent the subjects from using their short-term memory. So we gave them three distraction tasks, which comprised of filling out their demographics, which is watching a funny video and solving some quick math problems. And so after that, the subjects recalled within 5 minutes, and we gave them a survey about their experience. And 1 week later, after they came into the lab, we asked them to recall the items again.
So now let's talk about the results we got. So as of June 8th for our poster, we had 16 data points. And here is our first metric. For our first metric, all we did is simply count how many of the 30 items they got correct. We didn't care about the order. And as you can see here, the instant is actually very high for control and higher than the text and the image, sorry. And as you can see, a week after, however, the text and image outperformed the control. So we also see a similar trend in figure 2 where we measure the correctness of the order. And we were able to measure this by using a sum of distance squared formula, as you can see on the right. All we did was simply take an object's um, index order in the position, and we compared it with its correct position, took the difference, and then squared it, and then summed it all together.
In figure 3, we asked participants to note how hurried they felt during the memorization process. And these are results that we predicted. We predicted that the control group would feel less rushed on average than the text only and the text plus image groups, as the control group used their own memorization technique that they've been familiar with to recall the 30 items. Meanwhile, the text and the text plus image groups used the method of loci, which they might not have been familiar with. And in figure 4, we asked how mentally demanding the task felt, just memorization in general. And all of the participant groups felt about the same kind of mental distress. We also asked participants to note if they would use this app in the future, and we had an overwhelming response with participants saying that they would use it. We had a few participants saying that it helped with the creative process, that helped them understand how they were supposed to memorize the item, and it made it a lot easier for them. And we also had another participant say that the visual aids helped them make that really good mental image between the location and the grocery item.
So now for further discussion. So in hindsight, we measured up all the group A, group B, and control group results, and we see that, yeah, in the short term, group A did a lot worse than control group as well as group B. And but in the long term, they equally did well. They held up much better than control group. So we think that the method of loci, especially with our memory lane app, can greatly boost the effectiveness in the long term.
The control group reported feeling less rushed, as we mentioned earlier, as they had to use their own memorization technique, but also because they did not have 2 sentences of hints to read through. And all of the groups reported a similar level of mental demand. And so we think that without the 8-minute time pressure to memorize the 30 items, that experimental groups A and B might find the method of loci memory tasks to be less demanding than the control group. And in a separate question, um, users indicated that they favored using the method of loci with the technology aids than without them, which indicates that the GPT-4 aids did really help with the mapping process.
Now, moving forward, our study is actually still ongoing. We have about 20 data points right now, and our goal is to reach more than 30 since we need our p-value to reach a significant level. And yeah, if you happen to be in the area of Santa Barbara, feel free to sign up. Actually, no, we can't let you do it now since you know about the study. But yeah.
We'd like to say special thanks to our ERSP faculty mentor, Professor Tobias Hollera, and our ERSP graduate mentors, Radha Kumaran and Alex Rich, as well as the UCSB ERSP director, Professor Ziad Matni, and Professor Richard Mayer, who was a psychology professor that helped us along this journey, and to the ERSP teaching assistant, Thomas Scribbler.
Thank you so much.